You everyone for being here. I think three of us are super excited about this month and what we're doing. I'm Marlysa Sullivan, and I'm a physical therapist and yoga therapist. And I have known Steffany for many, many years, and she is the one who gave me confidence in writing and research, and really supported me in my process. So I just have so much respect and gratitude about everything about Steffany. And I am so glad to get to be here today. And so we're going to get started. Steffany, or Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself first and then we'll go to Steffany, or
Yeah, hi, I'm Lisa Kaley-Isley. I'm a yoga therapist and clinical psychologist, so I'm that blend.
we'll bring it to you, Steffany. If you want to, give any kind of introduction to yourself and then tell us a little bit about your inspiration for writing this book the way that you did.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Marlysa and Lisa, and it's good to see everybody here. I'm grateful for this venue and what we're doing here. I think it's super cool. So I am primarily a research scientist, and the focus of my research is on the application of yoga and other integrative health practices, primarily for the management of chronic pain and arthritis as an umbrella term for over 100 different conditions that are autoimmune and systemic, and also conditions that affect the joints and the joint tissue. Um, so Oh, I'm also a yoga therapist. I'm a practicing yoga therapist, yoga teacher trainer, yoga therapy trainer, and obviously author. I'm also a health coach, and a narrative medicine facilitator. So, the impetus for this book is that I'm not going to share the entire backstory of how I ended up focusing on yoga for arthritis, because it's a great story, but it's a long one. Very serendipitous, lots of just really surprising moments. Um, but I had been doing this work for years at a time when especially yoga research was just starting to get some momentum. The National Center for what was then called NCAM, National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine in the US, was relatively new. So there was a budget for like serious research in the US on yoga and other integrative health practices, what we now call complementary and integrative health. And there was a lot of interest in this. And as the science started to come out, people were looking for it. Um, and there wasn't a whole lot of access to yoga that was specifically for people living with arthritis and chronic pain conditions. In our research at the Johns Hopkins Arthritis Center, we were conducting a clinical trial looking at the effects of yoga for people living with rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. And I was getting a lot of interest every time I would present at a conference, even though I was only a doctoral student, and no one of note in, the academic circles. It was ending up in the press because it was just so intriguing to people. And because it would end up as a little blurb in the press, people living with arthritis would contact me and say, where can I find a yoga class? And yoga teachers would say, where can I learn about how to work with people who have arthritis? Because they're coming to me and I did not learn about this. So I was really interested in addition to the trainings that I was doing, in a book that would sort of get the word out more broadly. But it was really important to me that it be a specific kind of book, that its approach be whole person in nature, because there already were actually quite a few books that were about how can I do asana differently? What are like all the different ways that I could do a pose for a variety of different reasons? And I did not want to write a book like that. One, I thought that that was the least interesting part of what I was doing in our clinical trials. And two, that was already available in a bunch of different places. What the story that I wanted to tell is about what we were seeing in our clinical trials, which is people's lives were transformed. And partly by the increase in physical function that they were experiencing, but a whole lot because of the way that their perspective had changed and the toolbox that they had for being able to live differently with their arthritis, whether or not it changed in any direction and unpredictably as arthritis does. So I had that in mind, but I had never written a book before, and I was very it felt overwhelming. It felt overwhelming because like this was my life's work up to this point. And so it felt like it had to be all of the things, like I'm a scientist, so it has to be correct, it has to be precise, it has to be evidence-based. And that all was pretty intimidating. But I was at a conference. I think it was the SIR meeting or the SITAR meeting through IAYT. And Singing Dragon had approached me about it with an interest in this book. And I was like nervous and reluctant to do it. Erin Byron, who is phenomenal and part of this women's writing circle, was there. We were actually sharing a room, and she said she had written multiple books already and has many since. She essentially said, I am only going to make this offer one time. Do you want help writing this book? And so I jumped at that opportunity. So it is my life's work and research, and it would not, she was like, to say that she was a doula for this book is an understatement. We're co-authors on the book, but I would not have felt confident writing this book if I didn't have her by my side throughout the entire process. And we could talk more about that, but she definitely helped me understand how to write a book. And since then, I've been able to write multiple books on my own through some of the strategies that I learned with her. So that's how we got here.
Thanks. I put a little comment in the chat just so that everyone know as you come in um, that if you have any questions about this book or for Steffany about anything, almost anything, then you can please enter them into the chat so that we can really support conversation and dialogue. So we definitely want to support that as we go. And kind of before we move into more of a discussion, we had talked about having you share a practice, Steffany. So if you'd like to, we can settle in, share a practice, and does it seem like a good time for that?
This is a great time for that.
Okay.
So, I talked about this being a whole person focus, the approach to this book really being about the whole person and not primarily about the joints and the joint tissue, which is what everyone thinks arthritis is about. And it is, and not nearly only that. So the practice that we're going to do is actually a breathing practice that can be really helpful in the management of arthritis. So if we find a comfortable seated position, so settling into your seat so that you feel grounded, maybe plant the feet on the floor if that's a position that works for you. Perhaps you're leaning against the back of a chair, perhaps you're away from the back of the chair, whatever position allows you to feel the length in your spine. Drawing the shoulders back and down, letting your arms relax at your sides. You could close the eyes if you would like to, or soften your gaze. Notice if there's any tension in the body that you could easily soften through intention. And then notice the breath. Bring your awareness to the breath. Notice the inhale and exhale. Perhaps notice how your torso moves as you breathe. Expanding on the inhale and then softening on the exhale. You might also notice a brief pause between the inhale and exhale, or between the exhale and inhale, or both. Just allow yourself to be present with the breath here. And then notice the length of the inhale and exhale. Perhaps you can count in your mind how many beats or seconds it takes for each inhale and each exhale. And in doing so, you can identify what we call the breath ratio, the relationship between the inhale and the exhale. Without judgment, without concern, just an observation. And then as you breathe, see if you can allow that exhale to lengthen so that each exhale takes just 1 second or beat longer than it did the breath before. Allowing the breath to slow. And with the exhale lengthening in particular, you might notice a change in sensation in the body. You might notice a change in the nervous system, a sense of calm or ease in the body and maybe also in the mind. This breathing practice is actually shifting the state of the autonomic nervous system. And while we think of pain as being in the body, it's actually a signal in the nervous system. So we can shift the experience of pain through practices like this without changing anything that's happening in the joint tissue per se. And take another deep breath in, let it out with a big sigh. Blink your eyes open if they've been closed. Maybe take a little stretch, a little wiggle. Good to see you all.
Thank you. I feel like now we're really starting. Thank you, Steffany. So one of the things about your book is that it does take this whole person approach to a condition and a population. So can you, like, anything you want to tell the group or talk about as far as why and how you take a whole person approach to arthritis? And I think too, I'm always interested in how you bring that approach to research too. But
Yeah, it's a great question, Marlysa. And maybe I'll actually start with the research part of it, which is when we're designing a research study, we decide what's going to be included in the intervention. In this case, a yoga intervention. Yoga is lots of things. And so what exactly are we going to do? What is the yoga part of this study? There's a whole lot to design about the study, right? What's the methodology? What outcomes are we going to use? How are we going to do the measurement? What's the setting? Who exactly are we going to recruit for the study? But perhaps the most important is, what are we actually going to offer? What are we calling yoga? And so we can say, all right, well, if we're thinking about the mechanisms of this, what do we think the primary mechanism is? How is yoga having an effect? If we think that yoga is having an effect, what is the effect and how is it happening? So my primary concern is what we call patient-reported outcomes, or things that the patients tell us matters to them, right? So you could, as your outcomes, measure what's happening in the joint, right? What is the progression of joint space narrowing, for example, as a measure of arthritis progression, or range of motion in the joint is something that we could measure. But I care about how your life is going and how you feel. And actually, for arthritis in particular, when we're talking about some of the end stage treatments of it, like, for example, joint replacement surgery, you don't get joint replacement surgery because of the amount of space. You get joint replacement surgery because the symptoms become unmanageable and start, interfering with life and function in a way that is undesirable. And so if we can change the way that you feel, then we actually change the way that your disease gets managed in the long term. So if we're thinking about pain and function as some of the primary patient-reported outcomes in arthritis. Well, what changes pain and function for people? And like I said, it's not the joint space narrowing. So we can think about the sort of the physiological changes, like, for example, if we stabilize the knee joint by strengthening the muscles that help to support the knee, that actually could change the progression of the arthritis, but it might not actually change your pain. But how about if we offer you some breathing practices that help to change the state of your nervous system? Or how about if we offer you mental practices that help you feel like you can just be with whatever is, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable, right? Like these are life skills that help you to live with arthritis and therefore probably change the way that you experience pain and the way that you feel about your function. And so when we were designing the study, that was our initial study, that was really important to me is, okay, yeah, let's absolutely give people a physical practice because we know physical activity is really important in all of the forms of arthritis. It's a core recommendation for arthritis management, no matter what type of arthritis you have, is move. Move in a way that works for you, that feels okay, that you enjoy, that you're going to do. There's actually a recent New York Times article that quoted me about this, like find something that you love and that you're going to do and that doesn't make you feel worse and, do it consistently. So we want people to have a physical practice that they enjoy, that they can adapt to their own body. And then also we want them to have all of these non-physical practices across the koshas, including especially the applied philosophy, which I know is something that you are also very passionate about, Marlysa, which I think, unfortunately, in a lot of the research, either it's not a part of the intervention or it's a part of the intervention, but it's not explicit. And so we don't know that it happened. It's just something that yoga teachers do. They sprinkle in the philosophy without necessarily being intentional about it. So it really matters to me in my research, not just this initial study, but all of the ones that we've done since, that the philosophy is actually explicit, that we're teaching people not only some ideas, but actually how to apply it in your daily life and in the management of disease. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Marlysa.
I think it does. And sometimes I'm putting things on the chat, everybody, just to help increase conversation and dialogue, and hopefully that's useful for y'all. So, and that way it can be more conversational, or if there's anything you want to bring out from whatever Steffany says. And I think from what you said just then, one of the pieces that comes to me about bringing out is that, like, we have so many ways in yoga to change the experience of how someone feels. And then that changes the treatments the person might seek out, the way they want to manage it, even the way they think about it, you know? So for me, what comes to mind, of course, is like, oh, changing the state of the nervous system. But, and then as you're saying, being even more explicit and as you change what someone's self-identity is or how they connect and have their relationship with themselves. So we can think about all the ways that we can change, like through the koshas, that we can change that relationship to change the care. So that's just where my thinking is going right now from what you said. I don't know if I have a question there, but
Well, I'll pick
yeah.
up on it and just say that when I was reading through the book, one of the things that struck me is a couple of times, Steffany, you said the mind is perhaps a more important practice. And really, since you've done physical now and physiological, we could progress now to Manamaya and when kind of how we're bringing in not only these ideas and the philosophy, which are really important, these principles that you can apply and put into action, but also how we also work with our minds to change some of these stories and beliefs and experiences that we're having. If you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So when I am conducting continuing education programs for yoga teachers and yoga therapists, and we get to the Panchamaya-Kosha part of it, when I talk about the neurophysiology of arthritis, one of the key takeaways I want them to have is that pain is an output of the brain. Like it's in capital letters across my slides. I tell them, to repeat after me. Pain is an output of the brain. Now, I mean, it's bidirectional signaling, but the brain as a driver of the experience of pain. People think, well, the pain is in my knee, so I've got to fix what's happening in my knee, and then I'll have less pain. But meditation changes the structure and function of the brain. It grows gray matter. And actually, living with chronic pain deteriorates gray matter. This actually, there's this particular paper. It's pretty old now, but I still absolutely love it. It's by Dr. Catherine Bushnell, and it is about chronic pain and the brain. And what she doesn't explicitly say that I just connect the dots on is that essentially you could think of meditation as an antidote to the effects of chronic pain on the brain. So the regions of the brain that are deteriorated by chronic pain are also grown by meditation practice. And so now, when I say meditation changes the structure and function of the brain, so it changes the structure of the brain, you're actually growing brain matter, but it also changes the signaling. And so the pain signaling, the descending pain pathway, is also transformed by meditation practice. And so one of the things that I talk about, to your point, Lisa, is that like if you're going to do one yoga practice to try to transform your life with arthritis, it's not the poses. In my mind, it's the meditation. Now, there are lots of barriers to the poses for people. And so we want to find ways to make the physical practice accessible so that people can improve their balance and they can improve their agility and their confidence in their moving body, et cetera, and find ways to move that are more comfortable, and body awareness. All of that is absolutely an important skill set for life with arthritis. And we also want to find ways to make meditation accessible, which means you don't need to be sitting cross-legged on the floor to meditate. You don't have to like set a 20-minute timer and sit in silence. But how do we start to make the mental practices an essential part of disease management in the way that we have decided that the physical practices have to be?
I'm interested too in, this idea of making meditation accessible. Like we have, you know, we kind of know ways of doing the postures, like with props and all that. What are ways that you make meditation accessible besides just the sitting position?
Yeah. Okay. So the sitting position
Yeah.
matters, and maybe it's not even a sitting position, right? And
Yeah.
maybe it's not even a position. Um, so maybe it's a moving meditation, or you're lying down, or you're standing, or whatever it may be. But there are also lots of different ways to meditate. And actually, there's some really interesting science comparing different approaches to meditation and the effects that they have on a whole bunch of different outcomes, mood, and actually the changes in brain structure and function are different depending on which approach to meditation you use. So there is a lecture that I do where I sort of go through a bunch of different meditation practices. And if you want this, then you do this one. If you want this, then you do that one. But I think, rather than worrying about, well, what is this meditation practice going to do for me? Which one actually feels better? Which one feels like it's something that I wouldn't dread, that I would actually be willing to do on a regular basis because I enjoy it, because it feels accessible to me. And so for some people, for example, being in silence is not comfortable, not necessarily trauma informed for everybody. So perhaps it's a guided meditation. Perhaps it's just the duration of it. Like, I'm going to literally meditate for a single minute because it's a start. It's the beginning of building a habit that's going to start to transform my brain and my life over time. And trying out different practices to see how they feel, different settings, even do it in a class, do it at home, use an app, but also the attitude toward the meditation, because lots of people think if I'm distracted, then I'm not doing it right, or I'm failing, or I can't meditate. And so also, I think a part of accessibility is helping people understand like what actually even is meditation and to recognize if I notice that I got distracted, I'm winning because I noticed, because I'm starting to pay attention to my thoughts. And that is a huge part of actually being able to change my thoughts and my relationship to my thoughts. So every time I notice that I've gotten distracted, pat on the back, good for me, I noticed. And then what do I do about it? Because I think you could sort of distill all yoga practice into attention and intention. Where am I putting my attention? And then what am I doing with what I've noticed? So I notice that I've gotten distracted, and then I get to decide, am I going to stay with this rumination or this, line of thinking? Or am I going to decide, I noticed I've gotten distracted. I'm going to come back to what I set out to do here, which was to pay attention to my breath or to notice the sounds in the room or to repeat my mantra or whatever it may be. So I think we can do it in duration, we could do it in setting, we can do it in approach, but we can also do it in, our mindset about the meditation and what it means to succeed, quote unquote, in a meditation practice.
Lisa, you're muted.
Good Lord, I keep doing that to myself. Thank you. Thank you, Marlysa. What is that, the phrase of the year for 2021?
Yeah.
I was supposed to have learned
Yeah.
already. You're muted. I'm just going to jump in. Thank you, because that was so much my experience of this book. So I noticed the subtitle is a whole person approach right below the arthritis. And then the first time we talked about this, you were talking about how important it was that it was a whole person approach. And I said to you, I think you really pulled this off. So I'm going to plug the book here for you and say, general all-purpose yoga therapy book, very good. Because along with the way that you're talking about this open door strategy, find what resonates with a person, go that way, keep walking through it, notice things. This book is chock full of all kinds of practices, but some really useful reflective practices, contemplative practices, different meditation practices, different sensory practices, physical practice. So there's a whole lot in here about how you take what you said in those 5 minutes and flesh it out. So if this is resonating with you guys, really there's more. And part of what I remember my teacher saying to me one time in some of his teaching, Pandit Rajmani Tiganayat, he said, people have made yoga small and yoga's not small. I want them to realize again just how much richness there is. And I think that's what you're bringing to this, is this awareness of the richness that yoga is, rather than letting us condense it into something small that's only about the asana. So
I
really
mean, I
enjoyed
think
that.
all of us who have been studying yoga for decades are
You
on
know.
the tip of the iceberg. It's so incredibly vast. So yeah, I hope that this book helps to broaden the lens, especially when we think about how does yoga apply to arthritis and chronic pain management, and there's so much more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, if you wanted to show more, it came. Go
Lisa,
ahead.
do you want me to go into some of the questions in the chat or kind of move into the other question? There was one question up here, but just so it doesn't get lost, maybe I could ask it now.
Okay. I was going
Okay.
to hold them for the end during the Q&A where
Oh, you
people
can,
could speak
yeah,
too.
you
But
can
if you
hold it
want,
for
if
the
there's
end.
one that feels like it fits in and you want to do it, go for it.
I just didn't know if there was this one question from Lamore about, do you think if we can change the gray matter and our perception of pain through meditation, a byproduct of that might be more openness to trying postures and an easier time of it in the postures?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So that actually reminds me of another research study that we conducted that actually paired acupuncture with yoga therapy. And the way that we designed it, so first of all, there was an acupuncture study, and this is in a federally qualified health center for people with all kinds of chronic pain.
Mm-hmm.
And they initially conducted an acupuncture study, group acupuncture. So people in a room, the acupuncturist walks around, gives people treatments with a staggered start. And what the acupuncturist said after that study was these people really need to move. Like that is, the acupuncture is great for helping with pain management. And that is something that's really missing from their self-care is movement. And so the research team thought, oh, well, why don't we bring in yoga? Because yoga is movement and it's, philosophically aligned with acupuncture. So when we were designing this sort of combined study that included acupuncture and yoga therapy, we thought, well, let's have them get the acupuncture first. In fact, let's have them do a couple of acupuncture sessions first before we even introduce the yoga, because we know that acupuncture helps to reduce pain and it's a passive treatment. So the participant receives the acupuncture, whereas yoga is a very active treatment. You're learning things that you have to do, right? So if we could help to reduce the pain a little bit, then that might, one, help people to be able to do more, and two, help them to feel more confident about being able to do more, right? And then the idea is, well, we know that yoga reduces pain also. So we take the gains that we get from some acupuncture care, and then we add in the yoga, which is also going to contribute to pain management. But in addition to that, it will also help build physical function besides the pain, right? Like acupuncture can help improve physical function because of its effects on pain. Yoga can help improve physical function because it also incorporates physical activity. So I think you could think about meditation in a similar way. Like, start with a mental practice where you are there can sometimes be this sort of fear avoidance cycle in the management of chronic pain, where people are afraid to move, and because they're afraid to move, they don't move, and because they don't move, their ability to move is reduced, and then they're more afraid of moving, and on and on. And so if we can break that cycle by meditation's effects on pain processing, then people might feel a little bit better about moving and therefore might be able to do more in the physical practice. So, yeah, I think that's absolutely possible. I also think there are a lot of barriers to meditation. And so that is not necessarily the place I would start. With most people, I would start with the breath. And in that study, actually, the first practice we taught every single participant in the study when they got to the yoga arm was just deep abdominal breathing, because that also changes pain processing, as we discussed. And people are already breathing. Breathing isn't weird or unfamiliar or foreign, right? And it's also non-threatening. And so if we can help people to breathe differently, and you can also, as you all experience, you can feel the effects of changing your breath immediately. And so that can be really reinforcing of like, oh, wow, I just breathe differently and I feel better. What else can I try? So I would actually start with the breath before even bringing in the mental practices as sort of a foot in the door.
A good way. Yeah. Well, I'm going to take a lead from Marlysa then and look. And there's another meditation question. So while we're on this topic, Sherry asked about, could you cite that meditation paper on various outcomes with various methodologies? Because that does sound intriguing. And I actually looked at the book to see if that was the reference I had circled earlier, but it was a different one. Um, it maybe toward the end, but just to remember, or if you know it off the top of your head.
I don't. There's more than one paper that compares different approaches to meditation. There are a couple of them. So Kylie, the business manager for Yoga for Arthritis, is here, and she may have access to that because I cite it quite a bit. So Kylie, if it probably is in the Science of Meditation slide. So if you can find it, great. And if not, get on PubMed and search comparative meditation. Actually, I think several of them compare mindfulness meditation with mantra meditation with loving kindness meditation. So you could also put in those search terms.
The big three.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the questions oh, sorry, Lisa, were you?
No, hoping you'd go.
Uh, one of the other questions we were thinking about were, what are the different myths that people have about this population or working with this population? What gets misunderstood about the idea of yoga for arthritis?
Okay, so one of the main myths is that arthritis is a condition for old people. That one, that only old people have arthritis, and two, that all old people have arthritis, and neither of those is true. It is true that the prevalence of arthritis increases as we get older, and that is primarily driven by a specific form of arthritis that increases in prevalence with age. That's osteoarthritis, and that is by far the most common form of arthritis and highly correlated with age. But there are lots of other forms of arthritis that that tend to occur in different stages of life, including in early childhood. And it's also possible to get osteoarthritis at any point in the life cycle. So, and there are plenty of people who are well into old age without osteoarthritis. So, assuming that a particular older person has arthritis is misguided, and also assuming that if someone is young, they can't possibly have arthritis, that is also misguided. There are, in particular, 300,000 children in the US who are living with arthritis. And those conditions tend to be systemic and autoimmune. So that's another misconception about arthritis is wear and tear. You wear down your joint tissue, and that's arthritis. And even in the forms of arthritis that we think of as wear and tear, it's more complex than that. They are also metabolic. They are also inflammatory. They are also epigenetic. And so arthritis is complex, and arthritis is whole person. And this is why when we talk about a whole person approach to arthritis, of course we should take a whole person approach because it's a whole person condition, as is, I would imagine, every condition, because our body systems affect each other, right? So arthritis is multifactorial. It occurs across the lifespan. And because some of the conditions under the umbrella of arthritis are systemic and autoimmune, it's the treatment also is more involved than, let me brace this knee or let me build this muscle. We have to actually change what's happening in the immune system in order to regulate these conditions.
Thanks.
You wove in that whole person again. Well done.
Yeah. What kind of updates do you have on this material that you might want people to know about?
I'm so glad you asked that. Okay, so our most recent study is a comparison of yoga. And when I say yoga, whole person yoga, so movements and postures and breathing and meditation, mental practices, relaxation, applied philosophy, etc., the whole package. Comparing that to strengthening exercises, the kinds of exercises that are often prescribed in physical therapy for people who have, and this population in this study was specifically knee osteoarthritis, which is an incredibly common form of the most common form of arthritis. So it affects many, many people around the world. And the findings from that study are really fascinating. So we did for that study what's called a non-inferiority study, and this is happening more and more in yoga research. How does yoga stack up to an established sort of gold standard of care, something that's already integrated into conventional medical care, so that we can see, is yoga a viable alternative to that? And so that is like, is it at least as good as this other thing that people are already doing? And then that maybe provides people with some choice. And especially if the yoga has some benefits that the conventional approach does not. But then there's also something called a superiority analysis where we can say, okay, actually, which of these is better if we compare them head to head? And statistically speaking, you need a lot more people to be able to say that something is superior than to say that something is comparable, right? So we did both for this. And what we found was that yoga was at least as good as strengthening exercises for improving pain and physical function in knee osteoarthritis at 12 weeks, after 12 weeks of yoga. At 12 weeks, after 12 weeks of yoga or strengthening, mood was better for people with yoga than with strengthening exercises. Unsurprising, given everything that we've discussed already. And depressive symptoms are a really common comorbidity in arthritis. So being able to reduce depressive symptoms is important. You can also imagine that if somebody is feeling depressed, they are even less likely to do physical practice, to go out, take a walk, do social things, et cetera. And that can have all of those fear avoidance cycle kinds of issues. When we take the analysis out to 24 weeks, so we give you 12 weeks of yoga and then we say, go home, keep doing this on your own. Or if you got the strengthening, go home, keep doing this on your own. You've learned it, you know what to do. We followed out to 24 weeks and then yoga outperforms strengthening exercises on all domains. Better pain management, better physical function, and then also continued better mood than in the strengthening group. And that could be because over the long term, the effects are greater, right? The dose response is greater. The more you do, the better you feel, and that's more powerful with yoga. It could be because the people in the yoga group actually practiced a little bit more. So it may be that people are just more willing to do yoga, and that makes it a really important alternative. But also, I would suggest this third option, which is that strengthening exercises are something that you have to continue to do in order to maintain the benefits of it. Anybody who goes to the gym knows if you skip a week or a month or a few, you lose a lot of what you had worked for. Whereas when you learn to breathe, you just breathe differently. When you learned to, align your spine, you just stand differently. When you learn to notice your thoughts, you just notice them, right? So some of these practices, especially when you teach them as life skills, just become a part of the way people live, in addition to let me roll out a mat and actually do a practice. But that is also why in yoga research, we can't really do a crossover study where we give you yoga and then we let the yoga wash out and then we give you something else, because the yoga never washes out. Once you know it, it becomes a part of you. There are things you have to continue to practice to sustain, but there are ways that you are changed so that you're never going to not be aware that you can change your breath, right? So that may help to explain it as well.
Thanks.
And that's not in the book because the book came out before that research. So yeah,
and that is true. And I love, a little bit of what you said too. Like one of the things I love about non-inferiority studies is that it really supports the idea of patient-centered care, shared decision-making, those kind of qualities of like, if either of these, not even what you're saying about the long term, but if in either of these could work, then which one will you do? Which one, is in alignment with you? So I love that non-inferiority idea from that standpoint too. Yeah, the yoga never washes out. We have a couple of great questions, and we'll get to those in a moment. But just to kind of go with this question, can you tell us a little bit about your process for writing?
Yeah, definitely. As I shared at the beginning, I know people have joined in since. My co-author Erin Byron really helped hold space for this book and also helped me with the process of it. I had like writing assignments that Erin and I sort of worked out together what my writing assignments were going to be and when I was going to do them, so that it put it into bite-sized pieces so that it didn't feel so enormous. Obviously we wrote, so when Singing Dragon invited it, we had to write a book proposal that outlines what the structure of it's going to be. So we had the chapters and what the content of each chapter was going to be, but then we had to get more granular. Like, what are we really going to say in this chapter? And what are the pieces and parts of it going to be, including, for example, Lisa, as you mentioned, the sort of breakout practices. It was also really important to me that we were sharing stories of real people living with arthritis, because I had witnessed such profound transformation, and I felt that those stories are so powerful. And maybe later in this conversation, I can talk about some of the power of those stories. But so I had these sort of like little mini assignments for writing them that we would like piece together. I woke up every single morning for a year, and I wrote for an hour before my children got up. And so that is a way that some people write that works for them. For me, it was really essential. So it was quiet time in the house. And by write, I didn't just sit down and type for an hour straight. It was like finding sources for citations, and it was, pulling together
50
and
minutes.
editing and reading
Mhm.
over the thing that I had written the day before, or so all
Yeah.
book work, in that first.
Sorry, we have to unmute stuff. Okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no problem. Um, and then, put it together. But I think something really important to share about the process of writing this book is that during the writing of this book, two really profound things happened in my life. One is that I was living with my parents because my mother had terminal cancer, and my mother died during the writing of this book. And prior to that, I had been hit by a semi truck and suffered a traumatic brain injury. So I wrote this book every single morning with a traumatic brain injury while my mother was dying in the bedroom upstairs. The dedication to this book. So first of all, both of those things happened like in the last third to quarter of the year. So I did get a bunch of writing done before those things occurred, but I was trying to edit with a brain injury. And so Erin was absolutely essential there because I didn't trust my brain. I also couldn't work for an hour straight once I had the brain injury. And I didn't write at all during the very early recovery from the concussion. But I had really severe symptoms that lasted over a year. I mean, honestly, I still have symptoms of the traumatic brain injury. So having a co-author really made this possible. But also talk about, a whole person experience, right? Both the concussion and my mother dying were whole person experiences. And so I was using all of the tools. And the dedication to this book on like in the early pages of the book, it has a dedication, and the dedication includes the birth and death years of my mother. But when we were like doing the final editing, my mother was still alive. And so I had like 1952 dash. And I said to Singing Dragon, I said, she's on hospice. It's the end. I am not going to put that date until it's actually occurred. So I need you to give me some grace and say this book is entirely done except for that. And I will let you know when you can put the year. And it was December. But we knew that it was going to be that year. So they were gracious about that. And I was able to contact them before it went to print and say, okay, you can add the year now. So it was interestingly the experience of that year that included the book, but then went on beyond it, was the topic of my second book, which is a memoir about the whole person experience, including a lot of the tools from yoga that I used to navigate that year of recovering from a concussion and losing my mother.
So one book really led to the other, gave you the material for the next one.
Yeah, and hopefully that one will also be featured in a future Writers Collective book club meeting.
Yeah, there are the two stories, right? There's the one we tell about how we help people, and there's the other one we tell about how we help ourselves.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And too, just like the process of how a book happens and everything that happens to us while we're writing a book, and then how that impacts the book itself. That kind of like, very cyclical this thing. And so you kind of alluded to this idea. I mean, you had your own transformation, but that there are stories of transformation. And so do you have any other stories about, or what you want to share about the transformative stories of this book?
Yeah, so
I feel like I
actually,
use that word too much many
yeah,
times in that question, but
transformation,
no one's judging my
transformative,
questionability, are they? Okay.
not at all. You are unconditionally loved. Okay, so the stories that are in the book, because the book came out a few years ago, the stories in the book are, stories that I was honored to be able to witness up until that time. But of course, there are stories that have occurred since that did not make it into the book. So actually, one that I would love to share is somebody who was transformed by the book, or her transformation journey started with the book, because she got this book having never tried yoga and living with rheumatoid arthritis, which is one of those systemic autoimmune forms of the disease. And in reading this book, so she reports that she saw herself in the book. Like the book was a mirror back into herself of her own experience. Like she found herself in the pages of the book, which is all that I could ask for. Um, that book encouraged her to start practicing yoga, and her practice of yoga got her curious about deepening her understanding of yoga, and especially about the ways that yoga can be used to help manage arthritis and chronic pain. And then last year, Yoga for Arthritis, which historically has mostly offered yoga classes for people living with arthritis and trainings for yoga teachers so that they can teach people living with arthritis, and yoga therapists so they can work with people who have arthritis, but not a bridge between the two. How do people who are living with arthritis become the yoga teachers that offer it to other people living with arthritis? So last year we offered a 200-hour yoga teacher training specifically for people living with arthritis and chronic pain, because there are lots of things about yoga teacher trainings that are not necessarily accessible. Like learning how to become a yoga teacher is not necessarily accessible. So we designed a 200-hour teacher training for people with arthritis and chronic pain. And this person who read the book at the beginning of her her yoga journey is now a yoga teacher herself, who can then bring the tools of yoga to other people who are living with arthritis and chronic pain. So that's so full circle. And when people early on would contact me and say, where can I find a teacher who knows how to teach me yoga and, help manage my arthritis and make it accessible, make sure that I'm not going to be harmed. And it used to be that there were very few people that I knew I could recommend because I knew they really understood how to do this. But now I can say, have you ever thought of becoming a yoga teacher? And I think that, any of us can learn how to offer yoga in a way that's accessible for people living with arthritis and chronic pain, but there is something very different about being taught by someone who shares your lived experience. Everybody's lived experience is different, but who has walked that journey of life with these conditions and can share from that place of experiential knowing, I think is really powerful.
Thanks. And so before we get to the kind of Q&A part, do you have any upcoming books and research that you're working on, and like where people can find and learn more about, and even about your teacher training too?
Yeah. Okay. So, and Kylie, who's here, is probably going to throw some things in the chat for people to be able to find these things directly. On the research front, we're right now in the planning stages of a yoga intervention for kids living with juvenile idiopathic arthritis. So remember, I said that there are 300,000 kids in the US who are living with arthritis. And there's actually very little research on the effects of yoga for that population. And what I found in some of our research with adults is that I actually encountered people who had had arthritis since they were kids and who would say, wow, if I knew this sooner, if I had these tools when I was younger, it would have totally changed my journey with arthritis. And so hearing that enough times, I really felt like this should be explored further. So we're in the early stages of that, which I feel pretty passionate about. My next book is actually due to Singing Dragon next week. So I have one more chapter to write. And that book, the working title is Understanding Yoga Research. So the book is all about how do we access and appraise and apply yoga research? How do we make sense of it? And then what do we do with it once we've made sense of it? Both for people who are practicing yoga and want to understand the research, people who are providing yoga, so yoga teachers, yoga therapists, but also healthcare providers who might refer to yoga, and policy decision makers, healthcare administrators who want to understand more about the yoga literature. So that actually will have an accompanying course so that people can actually practice the strategies that we use. Like, let's all find some yoga research and then evaluate it together, evaluate the reporting quality, evaluate the intervention generalizability, et cetera. So it'll be a really hands-on training that accompanies that we're really excited about. And then, yeah, we do have the 200-hour that actually we're going to have our second cohort of 200 hours starting next month. And you can find the books there and reach out to us from there with any additional questions too. So arthritis.yoga is our website where you can find everything. And then my scholarly work. So I'm at Southern California University of Health Sciences. I'm the research director at SCU. And so you can also follow SCU for updates on our research.
Fantastic. Lots going on. To be continued. So I think, Marlysa, was that our list of things we wanted to ask?
Yeah.
And there's some things that you all wanted to ask. And Marlysa, you primed it really well by putting some comments in and training them what we wanted them to do. And so really appreciate that you guys have, I find the chat sometimes is like a little memory of the nuggets. Like if you go through and you find these things that somebody heard and it really resonated and you've written them in, so it's worth looking at them. So we're still waiting on that citation for the different types of meditation, although we've been taught how to fish and go look it up ourselves on PMC. But there was a question here about fibromyalgia. And Rachel wanted to know if you could speak a little bit about fibromyalgia as a particular type of thing.
Yeah, so fibromyalgia is sort of under that big umbrella of arthritis and chronic pain conditions. And the understanding of fibromyalgia has really shifted in recent decades. It often gets treated by the people who manage joint conditions, but it is not a joint condition. In fact, part of the reason why people living with fibromyalgia have felt so misunderstood for so long is because if you actually look at the musculoskeletal system of somebody living with fibromyalgia, you're not going to find anything abnormal. And so you can imagine if you are living with like profuse and severe chronic pain, and especially, everything is tender and, it hurts to put pressure on different parts of the body. And it is massively impacting your ability to conduct just daily activities of life and to do the things that matter to you. And then you go to the doctor and they, do some scans and they say, everything looks fine, how that might feel. So people with fibromyalgia have for a long time felt very misunderstood and frankly gaslit by the medical community. And now we actually understand that fibromyalgia is a condition of a dysregulated nervous system. So remember, we were talking about how pain processing is in the nervous system. It's not in the musculoskeletal system, though they do communicate with each other. But fibromyalgia is a dysregulation of the nervous system. And because of that, a very intense experience of pain and pain sensitization that may feel similar to symptoms of arthritis, but is not associated necessarily with a loss of connective tissue in the joints that characterize something like osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. And it is possible to actually have both. You could have osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis and also have fibromyalgia or dysregulation, a further dysregulation of the nervous system. Now, we know that just living with chronic pain affects brain structure and function, right? So that becomes this very cyclical situation where, if the dysregulation of your nervous system is causing you chronic pain, and then chronic pain is causing dysregulation of your nervous system, how that could be really challenging. Um, so what I would say about yoga for fibromyalgia management is, one, when it comes to positions of the body, when we're adapting yoga postures for arthritis, we're thinking about things like reducing the stress or the pressure on the knee joint. Or something that I talk about is like, isolating movement. So we're not going to go into extreme flexion in the joint and then add rotation and like grind the joint tissue that is also degrading. In fibromyalgia, we're thinking less about what's happening inside the joint and more about where pressure is in the body. And there are specific what are called tender points in fibromyalgia, certain points in the body that may be especially tender. They're a little bit different for everybody, but part of how fibromyalgia gets diagnosed is how many of these points are tender. In my experience working with people with fibromyalgia, there is a general increased sensitivity. And so even parts of the body that are not the tender points can also be tender to the touch. And so if we're thinking about yoga postures, especially positions where, one body part is resting on another, which may be something that you as a yoga teacher don't even think about. But for somebody with fibromyalgia, even just, this part touching that part could be pressure. And then also thinking about what parts of the body are supported by the mat or by the chair or, whatever props you're using. So using props where pressure is diffused, like blankets, or soft bolsters, for example, and just allowing options for poses that don't apply as much pressure. And sometimes that means changing the relationship of the pose to gravity so that there isn't the same kind of pressure on the body. And as with arthritis, teaching that self-awareness. And also, a lot of people in medical care are accustomed to being told what to do. And even though there is a movement toward patient-centered care where people are given the opportunity to collaborate with their healthcare professional, it's still a hierarchical system, right? The doctor is the expert and they tell you what you're supposed to do. And maybe they listen to you and maybe they give you some choices. But yoga, at least the way that we offer it, you are the world's leading expert of your own body mind. Nobody knows what it's like to be in your body mind besides you, and certainly not better than you. And also, you are completely in charge of your own body mind. You are the only one who gets to decide. And so, as that expert, you can listen to what the yoga teacher has to offer, has to suggest, and then it's up to you to say, that works for me, that does not work for me. I'm going to take that and I'm going to do it, I'm going to adjust it, I'm going to do it a little bit differently because this is what feels right for me, given what I'm noticing in my own body, given my intuition, my experience of my body. So really making that sort of choice-based care a foundational part of the delivery of yoga for all populations, but I think especially in fibromyalgia. And another really important component of fibromyalgia that it shares with especially some of these autoimmune forms of arthritis is the fatigue. Mm-hmm. And then also what fibromyalgia shares with traumatic brain injury that I have a history with is the fog, the mental fog. And that can happen in some forms of arthritis as well. So thinking about the whole person experience of how do we work with bouts of fatigue? How do we work with mental fog, right? So like a concentration form of meditation might not feel accessible when you're really struggling with brain fog. Or trying to remember a sequence and get it doing a sun salutation that has a whole bunch of parts to it that have to go in a different order could be really challenging when you're struggling with cognitive aspects. And then also just giving options for the speed of things, or how many you do, or how much time you take to rest in between, making that part of choice-based yoga delivery. And also making gentle versions of practices equal to more challenging, more physically challenging aspects of practices. So I think oftentimes yoga teachers, even when they're offering choices, those choices are presented with a hierarchy. Like this is more advanced, or this is better, or this is if you can, or, what that kind of language. Well, what if I can, but I choose not to? So making all of those choices equally valid, I think, is really important for all of these populations.
So you're hitting on the importance of language, the way we offer these things, the way we communicate them, all that important delivery. And what your answer really bled into this next question that we had, which is, and this is one reason I said just kind of a general good book on yoga therapy, because you talk specifically about this condition, but you talk more generally about this way of approaching whole people, and how all these rich practices we have, and how we gear to the individual, and how we progress that you've spoken to today. And so a question from Lisa Patterson is that if it seems like that all these things that you're saying could fit in most chronic pain conditions, rather than being specific maybe to arthritis. And so she highlighted, is there anything in particular that wouldn't fit for other chronic conditions that do fit for arthritis, if that's something you could address?
Yeah. So one, when we're talking about chronic pain conditions, I do want to underscore that the term arthritis is not one condition. And if you go on the Arthritis Foundation website, they have a list of arthritis and related conditions, which is over 100 different diagnoses. So when you're thinking about a chronic pain condition that is not arthritis, it actually may be under that umbrella. So for example, chronic nonspecific low back pain, there actually isn't any pathology in the spine. It's non-specific, which means we can't actually explain what the root cause of that pain is, and yet it's still considered part of that umbrella of arthritis and related conditions. So I wrote this book thinking about arthritis and related conditions, like all of the stuff. And so one, the approach to yoga is going to differ based on the specific pathology, but it's even more so going to differ based on the experience of the actual individual, because even two people who have osteoarthritis of the knee have really different challenges with the osteoarthritis of the knee. It's related to, well, is it bilateral, or, is one knee affected and the other not, or one is worse than the other in terms of pain or range of motion, and how progressed is it? And as we know from the science, and this is really fascinating, there is essentially no relationship between tissue pathology and pain symptomatology. In other words, you could have very little damage in the joint and a whole lot of pain, or you could have a whole lot of damage in the joint and very little pain. And so when we are offering options for yoga, or when we're choosing practices to deliver, it's based on what somebody is experiencing, which is more than just what does their X-ray or their MRI say, right? So there could be somebody who has bone on bone knee osteoarthritis, which means the cartilage is essentially gone, who can still do a whole lot of asana and, and has a whole lot of physical function. And there might be somebody else who has bone on bone knee osteoarthritis who has a very difficult time moving at all. And so then the way that we deliver yoga is going to be much more about that individual human than necessarily the fact that they have knee osteoarthritis. The other thing to add is that we are working with whole people, and nobody is just one thing. So even if two people are living with knee osteoarthritis and they have similar functional limitations, et cetera, one of them is also experiencing depression and the other isn't, and that's going to affect the yoga practice. Or someone also has frozen shoulder and the other one doesn't, right? So we're looking at the whole person, which is where one, yoga therapy comes in, where we can really work with people on, what yoga practices are going to be aligned with their goals and where they are across all of the koshas. But also when we're offering choice-based yoga, that we're taking all of this into consideration. I will also say, if you are a yoga teacher, you are teaching people who have arthritis, whether you know it or not, because arthritis does not look a certain way. You can, walk into a yoga studio and have absolutely no visible signs of arthritis and have a lot of symptoms and limitations. And you could also come in and your hands are gnarled and your knees are swollen and, it may be more visually obvious. And remember, it can happen at any stage of life. And so you could have somebody 22 years old, looks perfectly healthy, comes into a yoga class. You don't know that they actually can't put any weight in their hands because of the wrist involvement of their arthritis. So I try to tell our teachers that you should be teaching every class like it's a yoga for arthritis class, because it probably is, whether you know it or not. And people who practice yoga get arthritis too, right? So it could be that you start a yoga practice and then years later you develop arthritis, and it could happen the other way around, that you come to yoga because of the arthritis and then develop a, robust yoga practice and are still living with the arthritis and learning how to manage it. So yeah, I took you on a roundabout tour from that question, but hopefully I answered it.
And then some. That was an amen, sister response. Um, I want to point out, thank you for that. I want to point out that there are some useful things also in the chat. If you guys haven't looked, I want to pause for a moment, transition, Steffi, and say that the next book club meeting will be the 5th of January. That's coming soon. The book is Yoga Therapy for Children and Teens with Complex Needs by Shani Thornton Hardy, who's on here today. And the next one will be a memoir of her own. So Rachel Krensman's on the 20th of January, a memoir of healing, the path through yoga. And I think Stephanie's going to be the interviewer. So we'll have some folks around for that. Also, Kylie has put in those links that people were asking for to some of the things. So definitely click through and see if you grab some of those links. Okay, Steffany, we're to the point where we could pause and open it up to people asking their questions themselves, or we could have them continue to put it in the chat. Normally, when we have them ask themselves, we come off the recording and make it, keep the privacy of folks. So,
Lisa, before we do that, can I actually offer another little practice?
Yes,
and then that'll give
of course.
people
No
an
one says no to
opportunity to think
practice.
of their questions. Okay, great. So, I'm doing a lot of talking about the other aspects of whole person health beyond the physical. And also, yoga does have some very specific effects on the physical body and the joint tissue. And so one of the practices that I use often for people who are living with arthritis in the joints is joint mobilization practice. And so I'm going to lead us through just a little joint mobilization practice, and I'm going to explain the science behind that. Is that the joints that are most affected by arthritis are generally the synovial joints. And a synovial joint, you have two bones that are coming together with a space between them, and each bone is lined with cartilage, and that cartilage is many times smoother than glass. So incredibly smooth, that allows freedom of movement until arthritis starts to occur and you get a loss of that cartilage, a degradation of that cartilage tissue, and then it's not so smooth. It has little nicks and cuts, like you could imagine an ice skating rink sort of before anybody, after the Zamboni, when it's all perfectly smooth, right? That's healthy cartilage. And then after people have been skating on it for like an entire day, you've got all these little nicks and cuts and grooves, and that's cartilage with arthritis. But something else that's happening in that joint is that there's a capsule that surrounds the whole joint, and that's called the synovial capsule or the articular capsule. And inside that capsule is a substance called synovial fluid, which is why these are synovial joints. Synovial fluid, you could think of as like motor oil. It's a lubricant. It it sloshes over the joint tissue. And so you have a substance that is smoother than glass, and you've, washed it with motor oil. And so you can imagine how smooth and free that movement is. But then if the cartilage has nicks and cuts and grooves, all the more important to get that added layer of lubrication of the motor oil. Now, something that is super, super cool about synovial fluid is that it's what's called a non-Newtonian fluid or a dilettante fluid. There are very few of these substances in existence, and they have a property of becoming more viscous with pressure. So they get thicker when more pressure is applied. So when you have a lot of pressure on the joint, it thickens up to try to protect the joint more. So you could think about it as going from like motor oil to like molasses. And then it's actually creating more protection in the joint, but less freedom of movement. So if we're going to try to slosh the synovial fluid around in the joint and get it optimally lubricated, we don't want to do that under pressure. In other words, we don't want to do it weight bearing, right? We don't want to have weight on the joints while we're trying to lubricate them. Now, when we move the joints to lubricate them and slosh around the synovial fluid, it helps to reduce the experience of stiffness, which is a symptom that a lot of people who are living with arthritis have. And so after, for example, sleeping all night and your body has been pretty still, you can experience stiffness in the morning. For people with rheumatoid arthritis, morning stiffness is an important feature of the disease. But even for people who have just been sitting for a little while and then your joints start to feel a little bit stiff, we were talking about the Vata stage of life and dryness, right? And so being able to lubricate the joints by just doing a little bit of movement and sloshing around that synovial fluid is a really helpful practice. So to do this, we're going to just take the arms out in front of us, and you want to sit up nice and tall like we always do, right? So shoulders back and down, lengthen the spine, ground through the feet to stabilize. And then we'll start by just wiggling the fingers. Make sure we're taking full and deep, easy breaths, and then spread the palms wide and make fists. And if your fists aren't tight, if you're just opening and closing the hands, that's totally fine. And then roll the wrists in one direction. And we don't want to do any of these movements too much that they start to exacerbate symptoms. So there's a sweet spot where we're doing enough movement to lubricate and not enough to exacerbate. And then from here, take the arms out in front of you and then draw one elbow back and then the other. So now we're getting movement in the shoulder joint and in the elbow, right? And all of this is non-weight bearing. And actually we can move the forearm, rotate the palm up as you go. And then we're also adding a little bit of a brain game as we do that. You can turn and look over one shoulder and then the other. And now you're getting some movement in the rib cage and the spine. You can coordinate the breath. Exhale as you twist, inhale as you return. And then shake the arms out, roll the shoulders backward and forward, and then alternate one shoulder and then the other, backward and forward. We'll do one more movement. So you can imagine you could do this with the whole body. We're just doing a little upper body movement. Inhale, take an arm up. Exhale, tilt to the side. Inhale, come up. Exhale, lower. Inhale. Exhale. Doesn't matter how high the arm goes, whatever feels good for your shoulder. Exhale. We'll do that twice more. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. And the other side. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. All right. And maybe stomp the feet, wiggle the hips because we didn't get as much movement in the lower body. Shimmy and shake. And so you might feel not only the effects of joint lubrication, but also a shift in the energy state of the body, right? You might notice, and if we're really building that body awareness, you might notice that something feels enlivened or fatigued, something feels lighter or heavier, warmer or cooler. So a simple, short little practice like that is an opportunity to enact a specific physiological effect, but also to build awareness of like, what do I notice in the body when I do a simple practice like that?
Yeah. And I'm really glad you added that in. Thank you, because we talked about how yoga is not just asana, and yet asana is a very important one of our tools that really has a powerful effect, and we feel it in those multiple ways. And so to get an opportunity to do that was really, really nice. Thank you. So we have some questions. Do you want to take a
Great,
little more
let's go.
questions? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, so do we want to pause the video now so that the questions are
Private.
or are we doing them from the chat? And then
Well, I was kind of asking you because you had said before you really wanted the questions recorded because your answers are rich. You know, there's a
okay,
rich part
fine.
of the
So
material.
let's do the
But
ones that are
then
in the
if
chat,
people want
and
to
then if
interact with
people
you
want
and
to,
have
yeah,
that book club feeling,
yeah.
we could change strategy.
Okay, so we'll start with the ones in the chat, and then we can turn off the recording and do any others
Okay.
with people coming
All
on.
right. Well, so there was one question, and it's too bad Marlisa's gone because she would have liked this one too. But do you use polyvagal theory in your work?
Ah! Okay,
And
so
how influential is it in diagnosis and treatment recommendations?
okay, so Kylie, could you please put a link to the paper that Marlysa and I co-authored? So Marlisa's first author on this paper. This is her brainchild. We wrote it with Stephen Porges, who developed polyvagal theory, and it is all about the relationship between polyvagal theory and yoga therapy. And so that is, I mean, Marlisa's writing, she is like such a deep thinker. Her writing is like very complex and it stretches you can like feel your brain cells growing as you read her work. But I think it's a must read.
I
Um,
would agree. I actually, I always, it's one of the articles when I'm teaching yoga therapy as well that I always hand out for people because I think it's so beneficial. But I also have to do a little translation for some of
yeah,
some
okay.
things because
And
it's
so
so well written and so deep.
the question is about how I use that. And I think there was something about diagnosis and treatment in there,
Yeah, how
which
is it informed?
I do want to say that as a yoga therapist, I don't diagnose or treat because that's practicing medicine. But we can think about a diagnosis of like what are the imbalances that we're noticing from a yoga framework.
Yeah.
And then also what are the tools that we're offering from a yoga toolbox. And so I would say, yes, absolutely. It is a lens. It is not the sole lens or maybe even the primary lens. But when I'm training yoga therapists, I invite them when they're looking at, the combination of the intake and the assessment that they've done, right? So what did you learn from the intake, written and verbal? What does somebody report to you? But then also, what are you observing in the breath assessment, in the physical assessment? Taking all of that together, what are the patterns? And those patterns may lend themselves to one framework or another. So when I'm looking at a whole person from the intake and assessment, something that jumps out at me might be the vayus, or it might be the doshas, right? Or the koshas, or what. So when I'm looking at the whole picture, there might be a particular lens that jumps out to me as like, okay, this is where I see the imbalance across the whole case, right? So it's not just like, well, there's this one thing. I really try to take a whole person approach when I'm looking at care plan development. So it's not like, oh, well, I'm going to do this practice for this problem and that practice for that thing, but it's like, what is the imbalance? What is the nature of the imbalance? And what are the tools that I have that could help to restore balance in those ways?
Mhm.
So if it appears to be like, oh, well, the polyvagal component of this is really striking and obvious, then that may be where I start. And it's something that I'm always aware of and that might play into the care. And it also depends on the priorities of the individual, right? So it's a collaborative care paradigm. And so it's what matters to them. What are they willing to engage about? And then what am I noticing in terms of where the imbalance or dysregulation is that I can offer to the case? And so polyvagal is a part of that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking at across it all, seeing where they want to go, what would be useful to them and what they're open to. You know, sometimes people are more open to doshas or gunas or koshas or polyvagal theory or something. And as it's gained, I remember years ago referring people to some of these like why zebras don't get ulcers and some of this work. And now and people used to not know what their autonomic nervous system was. And now, there's so much more general knowledge. I think things have moved along so far, and that's so useful we can engage with. Thank you. Okay, so you're getting compliments, of course, here in the chat. Thank yous for the thing. We're about to the last bit. Is there something you'd like to say to close? And you have this opportunity just to wrap up.
Yeah. And I'm going to try not to cry about it.
Mm.
I think that the application of yoga to the management of arthritis and chronic pain conditions is about restoring whole person peace and balance. Um, it is an ongoing and unending practice because there are many things in life that pull us off of our center, and we have a set of tools that can help us come back to center before we have veered too far off. That we can think about that on an individual level. We can also think about that on the level of the collective. And I think as a human species on this planet, we are so far off our center. And I know that everybody who lives in the world of yoga, has a yoga practice, has self-awareness of their own energy, and the energy around them feels that. Um, I think it's hard to remain regulated as an individual when there's so much dysregulation collectively. And we have tools that not everybody has. And so if we can not only use our practices for our own well-being, but use our practices to be an example to the world, to be able to maintain our peace that hopefully spreads peace and well-being in a world that so desperately needs it. I hope that we can hold that intention beyond beyond how it can help us to feel better, how it can help us to find healing and wholeness as a humankind.
Here, here. Yeah, you're speaking to your intention and where you place your attention. And I think actually the impetus behind this particular group was bring to awareness to knowledge that we can each share with each other, but also build a community where we can hold each other. And you've done a beautiful job today of sharing some of this knowledge that you have acquired through your study and your practice and making it available to us. So I thank you on behalf of the group. And also how lovely to come here this night in this community and to be reminded of all the richness that we have. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you
you,
so much.
Lisa, for facilitating, and thank you to Marlysa, and thank you to Erin Byron for helping this book to be birthed. And thanks, Kylie, for sharing in the chat and helping people find resources.
Yay. I think the best way to close is always with gratitude and thanks. So we've done it. Thanks to all of you for turning up. We're
Om
happy to have
Shanti.
you here. We hope you'll keep coming. If there's anything else you want to say for just a moment to Steffany, we'll be here, but we're about to close. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Steffany, so much for sharing. Really, I
Thank you.
I learned and I appreciated it. Bye, everyone. Okay, I will